green feather from the wing that was strapped to my quill. And what it brought I could not stop to think, for the words came flowing faster than the ink had hit the paper. Call it inspiration, if you will.
I'm Laurence Fuller, and welcome to my poetry desk. Today's reading of Kaleidoscope is in honor of the late great David Hockney, whose portraits hang behind me on the wall here. This one is by Francine Krieg. This one is by Tanya Revillas. Two painters that I worked with a couple of years ago. Tanya I worked with probably a dozen times so far. We've collaborated on different things. And Francine I've worked with several times on similar collaborations too. We were working at the time on a collaboration about David Hockney, as I just finished a role portraying David Hockney in the TV show Minx that's now on Netflix.
Mr. Hockney, I'm always the last one here, end up trapping everybody else. That's the burden of my life. And tell me who you are then. I used to know everybody attends parties, but it seems like this town is just moving on without me.
Getting the role of David Hockney was completely by chance. It was an audition that came through, and the director and the producers had no idea of my personal connection to David Hockney, which you might not be aware. It's my late father interviewed him numerous times, and they had a close friendship. This was one of my late father's books, Beyond the Crisis in Art. You can see the names are crossed out. Warhol crossed out, Hockney's left, and then Hamilton, Caro, Pollock, Stella, Andre, Bergen are all crossed out, which is curious insight and one of the many mysteries my late father left in his writings. But it gives an insight as to his perspective on Hockney and how he felt about David Hockney. But the director and the producers had no idea about any of this when they hired me. They just cast me from a self-tape. And so it was fate. But what I personally always admired Hockney for was his challenging of perspective. The way that we think we see the world in this very literal way, in this sort of the plain surfaces of things, these events that add up to, a story in our minds that makes sense in a linear way, that time passes in a way that it should, that the characters that are in front of us are saying words that are that things are happening as they should, in a construction of a world that makes sense. And this is sort of presented to us since childhood, as in fairy tales and in even our schooling, or the films and TV shows that we're shown when we're children, is like it all sort of it all comes together, and things happen for a reason. Religion is sort of constructed in a way to make people feel safe with the reality that is presented to them, or their experience of reality. It all happens as it should. And you see that as well in the stained glass windows of churches, the way that they construct narratives to make us feel safe. And yet when you look at a stained glass window, it's different shards of the window that are making up the complete picture. And each of those individual shards can be taken for what it is on its own, or looked at as a whole, or partially. And so then when you're looking at the stained glass window, you're beginning to uncover the problem which Hockney and others, I think, have had the critical eye to see. That the world as we understand it, and the world as we experience it, is made up of many fragments, not one clear screen. like you may be watching me from one clear screen. But really your reality leading up to this point, you've probably taken in a lot of different scenarios through your phone, through social media, before you've gotten to me, or through other podcasts and audiobooks. You've heard a lot of different points of view, or different perspectives on the world, different ideas that are contributing and have given you context for the way in which you're looking at me now, which is sort of like one fragment of many that has made up the reality of your day so far, or maybe your evening. I don't know.
Perhaps it was when we had the courage to follow through, to fight until our bones too brittle carried us to bed. To protect, not to let the wares of this world beat the dripping beads of blood and ink from our brow. To keep fighting on. One's own
I don't know. But the construction of your reality, of course, is curated by you. You're constructing reality, and that's the beauty of it. Even how you take me now is your choice. And how you assemble that kaleidoscope of fragments is directed by you. What you choose to watch, what you choose to intake, which movies you go to, which books you read, which art that you choose to place on your walls, which poetry you choose to read. That's all part of the kaleidoscope of you. So Hockney, I think, was brave enough to look at that fragmented reality. And my father spoke about this too, that the experience of a museum or the experience of a work of art is often fractured and broken, and it's up to us to reconstruct it. Such as the experience of the Venus de Milo, or the smashed tablets of Moses. You know, the tablets that were handed to him by God, which he then dropped in Terra Blita when he saw the worshipping of the golden calf. Then people constructed a whole narrative around those fragments of the shattered tablets. Well, the Venus de Milo, very mysterious sculpture, has her arms missing. What is she doing with her arms? This incomplete picture of beauty is something that we make up through our own intervention, our own will, and our own imagination. And when presented with a dynamic screen with pieces missing, we then fill it in. It's those holes in our consciousness where we step in to fill it with poetry, art, music, cinema. And so I wanted to explore with this poem Kaleidoscope, which I'm going to read to you, and you're going to see some of the art of Kaleidoscope as well. I wanted to explore that, the nature of perspective. I want to adapt this particular collection for a number of venues around the world. The first one being the M2 venue during Miami Art Week that was playing on during Basel in Miami. I was over the road at M2, where they had 50 screens, like a kaleidoscope of images as well. And I was there with Seth Quinn, who had commissioned the entire collection. And we were sat in the middle of this huge space that was playing this kaleidoscope of images. And we were just looking around, talking about the future of digital art and different points of view and different perspectives. And as our conversations went on, me and Seth, they found themselves into the collection itself. One piece is called The Conversation, which is about sort of an overviewer or a collector or somebody who's looking over the work, or maybe a critic from the perspective of looking down onto it as a poet is working away at something. And those sort of fractures through which the conversation happens in this very fractured way, as many conversations actually do happen, in sort of a fractured way where two people may be discussing the same topic but from these sort of spiraling kaleidoscopic points of view, from different frames and different shards of glass. And at the time I was preparing for my trip to Thailand. This was the end of last year when I was talking to Seth about this collection. Talking about my trip to Thailand, which just took place. It was 3 months, and that was the longest period I'd been out of Los Angeles since I arrived in LA 15 years ago. The longest period of time I had been out of LA. And so I had some sort of unconscious anxieties about that I was talking to Seth about. I think embrace the unknown, and the unknown in both in our conversation and in the piece Kaleidoscope the Unknown took shape in the symbol of an elephant, because elephants are a national symbol in Thailand. Also, they have this memory, which is sort of fascinating in that it's so vast and so great, and can cover these vast expanses where they live and they roam, and they need to sort of keep track of landmarks and things like that, or things that have happened. So they have this vast memory, which in memory itself is kaleidoscopic. You remember fragments of things, and then your brain fills in the rest. You can see things, you can remember things as you saw them. Quite often, your imagination is filling in a lot of things around it. I've had some conversations with people recently where they swore they said this thing to me, or they, talked to me about where they were from, or had a conversation about, my origins or this and that, and I've said to them, we never had that conversation. We've never talked about this. Either they've gone away and they've looked me up and sort of pieced together in their own mind that they had this full conversation with me that we'd never had, or they dreamed about it or something. Again, this sort of confusing human kaleidoscopic experience of the world, where we're really just piecing together these fragments of information. And when you're probably taking this in on an iPhone, and I myself am guilty of this too, though I try to be curated with the content I take in, even then it feels like swiping away or listening to different podcasts, listening to audiobooks, things like that. The amount of information you're taking in from different points of view, at the end of the day, when you close your eyes, you see like this kaleidoscope of happenings happening, and multiple instances taking place, as doom scrolling can scramble your brain and shatter the single perspective into many. My timelines are mostly filled with art, and I know a lot of my friends' timelines are mostly filled with art too. Probably if you're listening to this, your timeline is filled with art anyway. But even when you do that, you close your eyes and you just see a kaleidoscope of all the art that you've taken in that day, kind of swirling around. And then the next morning when you wake up as well, it's like swirling around in front of your eyes. But it was great to shatter the glass with Kaleidoscope in this sense, to push beyond the screen and to adapt it for multiple venues around the world. There was the one in Miami we talked about. There was also one at NFC Lisbon in Portugal. Exhibition with Inksy during NFC. It was at the rooftop during Hong Kong Consensus with Ultra shows. At a rooftop in Hong Kong. And then at the Championship Knicks game, viewing party in an immersive environment in New York. Again with Nolcha. And then with Nolcha, again, we came back full circle. Consensus Miami. And another immersive exhibition there. Amazing to have this collection play at such a kaleidoscope of venues around the world. And each venue had its own details that needed to be considered and to be factored into how it was going to play out. And we're also seeing an immense wave of interest in immersive art with the opening of Dataland in Los Angeles by Rafik Anadol. Many people walking through the art, and it's all playing around them. Something that I think has to contribute to an aesthetic experience of digital art, which is possible. If it's possible in cinema, it's possible for digital art. Ideally with a large venue. So it's all around, and you can hear it all around, you can see it all around. That is perhaps the sort of highest form of viewing or experience of digital art, is when it's immersive. So on that note, I want to read the first chapter, the first poem, the first piece within the Kaleidoscope collection in honor of the late great David Hockney.
Green feather from the wing, which time and line brought into prime. Emerald feather that I found from the banks of the canal, unlike any bird that migrated this way. I thought it might write a better poem, so I strapped it to my quill. And what came out? I could not stop to think, for the words came flowing faster than the ink had hit the paper. Call it inspiration, if you will, what the rules laid out in definition. There I saw as clear as day the years and time which greatness made, and every footstep that I placed, the mighty did survey. If poetry could write itself, the wealth that wrought my fingers carved it out, like a hand against the wall with pigment sprayed. The colours with his quill,
they were matched in gold for what was plucked from the fig tree of Eden.
a leaf to cover shame, jade stone to immortalize the Emperor's name, the emerald mantle which held in frames, a candle bleeding flames. 5 letters covered fame: G, R, E, E, N.
This is the first draft of Kaleidoscope Green. You can see there's not really many edits to it. I didn't really like to edit my poetry. I think the more that you edit it, you sort of trim the rose, the thorns from the rose, and it loses its beauty. You've got to keep the thorns on the rose. However, the rose is more dangerous that way. It's true. And more beautiful for being flawed. So poetry is a very spontaneous art form, and I think even though I've performed this poem around the world, many exhibitions, it was written in one sitting and in one go, and from a spontaneous moment of inspiration, the words came flowing faster than the ink had hit the paper, and you can call it inspiration if you will. Okay, thank you. That was my first poetry reading for PoetiX Stream Podcast. I'll be doing more of these, so come back if you want to hear more poetry.